Hello, this is yet another new series that I'm calling Brainstorm, and basically, the title says it all. I just want to brainstorm on specific topics and record myself doing it. I'm not necessarily going to be trying to make really specific points or arguments in a lot of these videos if I do continue to do this. Instead, just more freeform, a little bit more experimental in terms of presentation. I'm not, in fact, even just for the audio, I don't want to isolate my voice. I just have a lot of room noise going right now. You're going to hear some sounds from outside too. I just want this to feel more open in free form, and as such, please forgive me if I end up like making a stupid point or not developing a thought to any great degree. But honestly, I just want to get into some topics that if I did have to sit down and write a specific thesis about it, I probably wouldn't end up doing it. I don't think I could take myself that seriously. But today, the sort of central topic that I want to get into and just talk about, I have a bunch of notes. I'm just going to talk about it in a very general, open-ended sense, is potential ways to subvert the dominant YouTube algorithm. I'm just going to call it the algorithm as if it's a singular thing. There are probably multiple ones that serve different functions on YouTube. And this is also just theoretical stuff. I'm not suggesting that people do this. I'm not necessarily suggesting that any of this is stuff that I'm trying to do with my own videos on the channel. It's honestly just something I want to talk about and just something I kind of want to think about a bit more. And but yeah, one of the immediate questions, of course, is why try to subvert the YouTube algorithm at all? Like, what's the point there? And it's debatable whether there is a practical benefit to trying to do any of this at all. I think that just in the purest sense, it could be a potential form of protest or resistance against the way that the algorithm currently works and what it tends to promote, and how what it chooses to promote then comes back around to affect what other people are making and putting on the platform. I think there's a huge amount of room for criticism of the way that YouTube functions right now, specifically in terms of automated decision-making happening behind the scenes. So yeah, but trying to subvert all that, trying to do stuff that the algorithm doesn't want you to do, or just not doing the stuff it really wants you to do, is some kind of small protest. I think some very small form of resistance, and I think that's just an interesting idea. And I do think there's also potential that if any of this is successful, it could kind of decommodify YouTube videos, at least in the eyes of the person making them, which for reasons I'll get into later, I think is very important. I think it's very important to think of your work as something more than just a commodity and how it performs in terms of potential monetization and pleasing the powers that be. So that's all. That's what we're going to get into. Those are the reasons why I think it's worth talking about. And before anything else, before we get into the actual, attempted subversion part, I want to talk about how there are certain things that the algorithm really seems to like. So I'm going to list those out. These are just purely subjective things I've observed. I'm sure many of them could be confirmed, but I'm not, giving a bunch of evidence here. This is based on my personal observation, things I've heard from other professional YouTubers, all kinds of stuff. These are the things that I've come up with that I think the algorithm really seems to like. And a lot of them kind of overlap in ways and interconnect, but that makes sense. It's all part of the same system, I guess. So the very first one is it really likes when your videos or your channel in general maintains the attention of users and results in keeping users on the platform for as long as possible. So we already know that it's a pretty big thing for social media platforms and plenty of other mobile apps especially. They really prioritize finding ways to keep users on their platform for as long as possible, especially in single sessions. And apparently, based on a New Yorker article I read a while back, it's only been within the last few years that some important people within some of these companies have started to consider that maybe there's some ethical issues with doing some social engineering stuff that results in people using your app for 8 hours a day. But YouTube definitely seems to like that. I mean, why do you think the autoplay feature came about in the first place? It's not just a convenience thing for users. That convenience results in people getting caught in just the rabbit hole, right? Or not even that. That sounds almost too active, but just sliding down, just kind of couch locked, just continuing to watch, even if you're only watching this stuff passively or listening to it in the background or you have it on while you're sleeping. The platform really likes when you're around for the longest possible amount of time because of another point, which is that the algorithm really likes serving you ads. It really, it still takes ad revenue very seriously. YouTube still makes quite a bit of money from ad revenue specifically. Creators seem to be getting less and less ad revenue as time goes on, and there's potential that the ad revenue model might be on its way out, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. The algorithm really seems to like engagement, interaction, or even like emotional activation as part of the videos, right? So engagement is typically specifically defined as liking a video, commenting, subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell, all the stuff that that you're going to hear plugged a million times by all the different YouTubers. And then the other categories, the other stuff I mentioned just falls under the same category, I think, just interacting with the video in some way, being actively watching something as opposed to passively watching, because then it'll also be more likely that you will actively watch the ads that come on or whatever it happens to be. And emotional activation, I think that refers to, there seem to be quite a few successful channels that actively encourage parasocial relationships between creators and presenters and the fans. I think there's some major issues with doing that, but the practical benefits of doing that seem very obvious. It, creates a sense of loyalty, potentially. You have a very passionate fan base. You have people who are potentially motivated enough to come watch your stuff on a different platform or follow you on other social media sites. Yeah, and YouTube, because that feeds back into people spending more time on the platform. If you're really emotionally engaged with the channel, then as soon as you get the notification that they've posted a new video, that's probably going to bring you onto YouTube in general. And YouTube loves that. Anytime that you're spending in their space is a huge benefit for them. I already talked about the algorithm really likes serving you ads. That's pretty obvious, I think. Next up, the algorithm likes high impressions click-through rates. So if you're not familiar with that term, a simplified version is that it's when someone, a user, gets an impression of a video or an article, usually just a headline or like the thumbnail for your video, sees the title, and then ends up actually clicking it and engaging with it. That's a big thing. That's a big metric for success on the platform. It's something that YouTube tells creators for every single video they post, how high that number is and how it compares to your previous click-through rates. Next up, it seems to really like consistent uploads. I don't know for sure, well, any of this, but I don't know for sure whether the ideal in YouTube's eyes is that you upload on a daily basis or you have multiple uploads a day, because there are definitely some highly professionalized channels that do exactly that, and it seems to be working for them. They seem to get those videos promoted quite a bit. I won't name any specific channels, but you've probably seen stuff like that. And at least based on personal observation, it really does seem to be tough when you space out uploads or you don't have a consistent schedule. I don't know for sure whether they promote a video less if you've had a gap of a couple weeks or even a couple months from the last upload, but it sure seems that way, and I've heard similar things from some other YouTubers. And lastly, the algorithm, of course, loves big numbers. It loves when you get high view counts, engagement counts, and just subscription numbers in general. It also probably cares quite a bit about the rate of growth in all of those areas. I've certainly had videos where once it had a spike in just the daily number of views, it promoted the video way more, so all of a sudden it meant that the video had a significant spike in views, maybe doubling, tripling, quadrupling its original view count. Although it does tend to plateau at some point, at which point YouTube will stop promoting the video as much as they have been. Okay, so that's our list. I'll try to type them up on the screen here. This is a list of things that I think the YouTube algorithm really seems to promote in some way, whether explicitly or implicitly. Next up, I want to talk, hopefully briefly, about just the challenges inherent to trying to mount some form of resistance within large systems of control. I won't be digging deep into political stuff, but I am going to mention the word capitalism a few times, so if that scares you off, sorry, I'm not really getting into anything in detail, but it gives me a nice example to work from that I think applies really well to the YouTube situation. I think that there is a huge issue with trying to resist some of these giant systems of control under which we live. There are many different systems of control. They're all around. They take many different forms, but specifically if we're talking about the ubiquity of capitalism in the US or North America and the effects of that ubiquity, I think that it makes it very hard to resist the system as a whole, and it makes it difficult to have that resistance not be either nullified or just completely commodified. So I'll try to give some brief examples here of how I think that capitalism tends to commodify resistance, as well as how it nullifies resistance. In terms of commodifying resistance, you can just see it happening all the time, anytime, and it's not necessarily just capitalism as a whole, but like an example I got from Mark Fisher, I'm just going to steal it here, is Kurt Cobain's situation and his whole thing of like, he was very vocally like critical of the music industry as a big giant whole, especially in the US. And it seems like he was really genuine about that. I don't think it was just a branding thing, or like that he knew he was the face of grunge, so he wanted to have a very specific stance against the bigwigs in the music industry. But either way, that slight form of resistance and criticism was just absorbed by that very music industry, and ended up benefiting the people who are already in places of power, because it's a really good selling point, especially when you're trying to sell stuff to like teenagers and young adults and stuff. Like, if you try to say, oh yeah, this guy really gets it, this guy's standing up for his ideals, he doesn't like how bad things have gotten, okay, great, that's a huge motivator to check the work out, right? And it feels relatable, especially if you're a rebellious teen. No matter what I say, even if I'm trying to say something very honestly, it's just going to get turned into a product, and it's just going to be another way to benefit exactly the stuff that I hate. And a more modern example that is extremely clear to see if you see any kind of ads or articles about this kind of stuff is that giant companies will co-opt social causes as a way to further their own branding and, of course, ideally make a bunch more money and increase their customer base and everything. The environmental movement that sort of really started to grow in the early 2000s and is now quite serious for obvious reasons. That's certainly one where even after it was like brand new, very soon after Inconvenient Truth, you started seeing companies, most of them massive, international conglomerates, putting out quote-unquote green products. Like, here's something made out of recyclable material. We're still selling the other one that has a really horrible carbon emissions and all that stuff, but here's the green option if you want to feel like you're supporting a cause, and that just translates to spending your money with them. Okay, you're in the store, there's two kinds of paper towels, and you're like, well, I know that these being mass-produced is a huge problem, lots of emissions, very big issues there with just the scale of production here. And you see the regular ones, and then the ones that are like brown and made of recyclable materials, or recycled materials rather. It can feel good to pick the so-called green one. It can feel like, oh, you know what, I'm doing my part. When in reality, well, maybe eventually that company would shift to the more sustainable production model. But in the meantime, no, you're just giving them their money. They just did some kind of savvy branding, and they took your money. And then on the other, another social movement that has been heavily co-opted by massive companies is the LGBTQA plus movement that we've seen over the last 20 years especially. It's become a joke even at this point that like Pride Month, the first day it starts, all the big companies will change their Twitter logo to the one that's a form of the pride flag or something, and then the day it's over, it's gone. They really just want to get in and get out because they know that right now it's beneficial for them to vocally support these causes. Whether they're actually doing anything to contribute to related charities or actually doing anything to limit or eliminate discrimination in their own company, that's irrelevant. As long as they can pull off this look, which might even just involve changing a logo or putting out like a really try-hard commercial that's like, what? There are two moms in this one? Wow. If they can do that successfully, people think, okay, again, it's the same thing. I think I'm supporting a cause by buying a product, as opposed to actually supporting a cause by donating to a relevant charity or donating time to a cause, things like that, actually taking tangible moves to improve situations for the people in question. Okay, so that was a big thing on how these big systems of control tend to commodify resistance. In terms of nullifying resistance, I think it usually just comes from the feeling of, well, what can I do? Like, what is the point of me trying to make any kind of difference? It's just not going to happen. Or even the sense of, this is another Mark Fisher thing, but it's a term he uses a lot called capitalist realism, which was apparently originally from Slavoj Žižek, and it's just the idea that capitalism has created this weird dominant thought among many people that like it's just so big and we've been doing it for so long that there is no other way. There is no other tangible alternative to the system, so why bother looking? It's not true, of course, but it's something that you'll find very commonly, especially here in the US. And that's a really effective way of eliminating resistance. If someone thinks it's not going to do any good, they're not going to do it. And there you go. you just knocked down the rebellion. I also think that these specific systems of control also, commodify and nullify artistic expression in very similar ways. Of course, like if you want to have any kind of audience, you're going to have to sell your art in some way or sell access to that art. Almost definitely. I have a bunch of notes here for that, but I don't think it kind of ties into the YouTube stuff, but I think we can, I think based on the previous section, we get an idea of how, you just have to work within the system if you want to share your art at all. If you want to make something, just keep it to yourself. Okay, then you don't explicitly have to support big giant systems where certain people profit more than everybody else. But if you do, if you want to get it out there, you're going to be participating in some way in that system, and certain people see that as a big problem. In fact, I've heard of a few contemporary artists who, either for all of their work or for specific works, they will just refuse to take payment for it because they're like, no, like as soon as I sell it, it's a product, it's a commodity, and that wasn't the point at all. That's like not why I made this. This is not how I saw it. So I think it's an interesting idea. Again, like the stuff we're going to be talking about here about subverting the algorithm, the practical benefits of that move are maybe questionable, maybe they don't exist, but at the very least, maybe that artist can then feel like, well, gosh, at least I didn't contribute to the system that I hate so much. So now we're going to translate those, we're going to shift those ideas over to YouTube and the recommendation algorithm. So I think that YouTube executes the same function of commodifying or nullifying any resistance or criticism of itself, essentially, of how it functions and the stuff that it promotes as it stands right now. So no matter what you say or what you promote in your YouTube video, it's always still going to be a YouTube video. And if you want your messaging contained in the video to reach a large audience, you kind of need to achieve at least you have to satisfy some of the terms of the algorithm. You're going to be playing the game no matter what. And this is just a challenge inherent to the situation. No matter, even if every single video you make says YouTube is awful, if you want it to reach a lot of people, it has to work within that system, and it will be contributing to that system in the end, including for specific reasons that we'll be talking about later. But yeah, in general, if your video does well at all, YouTube will benefit in some way, whether by serving ads to your viewers or by keeping people on the platform for longer or getting them to watch other videos and other channels. Any of that, it all kind of feeds into that funnel. And if you successfully subvert the algorithm, the subversive content of your video isn't disseminated at all. And so what was the point of it? This is kind of going back to the art example too. Like, what if no one knows that you didn't take payment for a piece of art that you donate to a museum or gave to a private collector or something? Like, what if no one knows about that? What if you make the greatest video in the world, the greatest YouTube video about the major problems with YouTube's algorithm and how the platform functions as a whole, but it doesn't go anywhere? Like, if the tree falls in the forest and no one is around, is it making the sound? Does the resistance have any kind of impact? Or is it just stuck? Like, what's the point? And that's not something I can solve either. That's just an idea that comes up, and I think it's relevant to any creators out there who are thinking of doing something more subversive or who don't want to play by all of YouTube's rules. It's just a problem with trying to subvert it at all. If the main question is how do we subvert YouTube's algorithm, there is like an ideal, very obvious answer that basically boils down to, well, don't interact with YouTube at all, right? Like, don't if you think YouTube's bad and you don't want to contribute to it in any way with your own work, okay, don't make YouTube videos. Don't publish anything to the site. And I think that the internet age so far has made it really clear that ignoring something can be incredibly powerful. It can be a really effective way of removing power by just not talking about them. We can talk about, specific political figures or problematic celebrities and all that kind of stuff. Like, a really good way to take some of their power away is just to you don't talk about them. You don't bring them up. You don't make a big post about how awful they are. You just don't mention them at all. And the internet, that's a really great way for the internet to start not paying attention to you. I don't think, even though this is a really obvious and straightforward answer for how we can subvert the algorithm by just not participating in YouTube at all, I think it's kind of a cop-out for that, the main question. Like, I don't think it's a very fun answer either. It's certainly not something I can talk about for all that long. It's just like, just don't do it. I mean, sure, okay, that's one thing. I see a parallel to people who will say, oh, if you don't like, an unethical practice that some business is doing, don't buy their products. Like, that's the only way you can voice your resistance, is to not buy the product. Which is, it's still true that can be important, but I do not think at all that it is the full extent of criticizing companies or specific people or whatever. I think it's only a fraction, and it kind of makes me frustrated when people assert that is the one single way that you have any power to stand up against bad practices. I'm going to shift the question a little bit, that main question of how can we subvert the YouTube algorithm, to instead be how can we specifically subvert the YouTube algorithm on YouTube, in YouTube videos that you're posting to the site. And I think there are any number of reasons to head down that route instead of just talking about removing ourselves from the platform entirely. Because there are, for one thing, there are not a lot of other viable alternatives out there in terms of social media video sharing sites that have huge audiences and the range of content that we're seeing on YouTube right now. YouTube has this massive, we could call it an install base, which in theory should aid discoverability. Like, there are literally millions and millions of users that interact with YouTube all the time. And when you compare that number to, the user base of like Vimeo or Dailymotion or other video sharing sites currently out there that serve kind of the same function as YouTube, it's nowhere close. It's just nowhere close. And so there are inherent benefits to having a potentially massive audience. Right? And in terms of range of content, we're certainly seeing that right now. Not necessarily among the really giant YouTube channels, but in terms of like the relatively large video essayists and stuff like that, and political people on YouTube, there's quite a range of stuff, even, just between political ideology, presentation style, and the people, the creators themselves actually making the work. And I think that helps to create and foster a kind of public forum effect. Like, through the unintentional cooperation of thousands of different creators, YouTube is in effect right now a kind of public forum, sort of like Twitter as well. Like, that's just how it is right now. It might not always be that way in the future, but right now it has a lot of people talking about a lot of different things, and that in itself is pretty valuable. So that's just another reason why we should keep this discussion to stuff that we're actually posting to YouTube, as opposed to resisting by not participating at all. We finally made it. Good job, everybody. Now we get to talk about specific ways to subvert each one of those algorithm preferences that I listed out earlier. So let's just get into it. The first one was about keeping users on the platform for as long as possible, maintaining attention, all that stuff. I think our potential options for subversion in this case are actually pretty interesting. For a lot of these, we're kind of approaching it from the opposite direction, or like sort of reverse engineering. When we know some specifics about how to achieve the things that the algorithm wants, it becomes a lot easier to come around the other side and say, well, let's just not do that, or find a different way of approaching that specific aspect. So in this case, we have a pretty good idea of how videos and channels can maintain the attention of viewers. You have really active content, right, where someone's not passively watching, they're actively watching a video. High entertainment value can be a good way of doing that. Minimal interruptions to the content, that could be, well, potentially fewer ad breaks, but also just you're not leaving gaps in the script or the presentation. You're not using huge clips from other media and stuff. Like, you don't want to interrupt that flow and pacing. That just helps, keep people's attention, keep autoplay on. They can just seamlessly travel to the next video. YouTube already keeps load times as short as possible, because that helps their cause substantially. If those are the ways that we can keep people on the platform, we can kind of do the opposite to push people away from the platform. And I know that's kind of a funny idea of making a YouTube video that discourages people from watching videos. I mean, it kind of did that already, but it totally fits into our mission here. I had a few ideas. I think that to combat that, we do the opposite. We have less dense videos. We have more interruptions. We can't, as creators, we can't force users to turn off autoplay, for example, but we can kind of simulate a switched off autoplay by inserting gaps or even moments of discomfort into videos. I think that could actually be a really effective way to kind of jolt someone out of the catatonic state of watching a lot of YouTube. Yeah, you can just have silence in the video. Just here, I'll put some silence in this video right now and see how it makes you feel. So within that span of time, you were probably more aware of your immediate surroundings, which is a really good way to come back to real life in a sense and maybe think, oh, you know what, I have to do this other thing, or just, I would rather do something else. Even feeling bored is a potential way to encourage people to leave the platform for a while, you know what I mean? I also think it would be really interesting to insert real world, like common real world sounds into your videos. So I'm kind of doing that right now. But yeah, like imagine like putting common phone ringtones in your video all over the place. Like just by reflex, a lot of viewers are going to be immediately checking their phones, or at least, you know, coming back to their immediate space and looking around. I think that's a really interesting way to do it too. Another way, we can directly address the viewer in some way, or like explicitly discourage watching. That's not the most creative thing we can do, but I think it could be effective in certain situations. And a really far out idea, it's not my idea specifically, but applying to this situation, this is definitely my least recommended one of this section, but like you could even try to slowly put the viewer to sleep. Now, I'm not talking about like some crazy hypnotism thing or like nothing weird like that, nothing super manipulative. But if you already have a piece of content that's relatively low impact, which I define as like streaming or something more casual where there are natural interruptions and it's not high octane entertainment all the time. The pacing is very slow. It's easier to just have on in the background. If you have a piece of content like that, I think there's actually a huge potential to maybe put the viewer to sleep very slowly. Some of these techniques have been demonstrated by one of my favorite podcasts, which is called the Sleep With Me. It's from this guy out of San Francisco, and there have been a lot of other sleep podcasts that have sprung up since, and I don't think he was the first one either, but he essentially uses very specific like storytelling and vocal delivery tactics to kind of bore you, or at least go off on different trains of thought where the story doesn't have all that much focus, and as a result you pay less attention, and so you hear the comfort of a human voice in the background. You are slowly losing your attention, and which makes it easier to sleep because you're also not focusing on anxieties and things like that. You are technically focusing on another human voice, but it's not interesting enough to really maintain your attention. But that's that. I'm going to move on to the next one now. So the next one is engagement and interaction. So I think this one, the ways of subverting this are very closely related to the previous category. So obviously we can explicitly not encourage engagement. So we just don't plug subscribing and liking and commenting, all that stuff. We just don't mention it. You'd be surprised how much mentioning that stuff actually results in people doing it. So if you don't mention it at all or don't bring up the topic, there's a decent chance that there will be less engagement on that video. Outside of that, I think that and maybe this is I think that this is kind of healthy in a general sense too, but I think it's great for creators to not support the establishment of parasocial relationships with their fans, or even potentially counteract the establishment or maintenance of those parasocial relationships. Like, every creator appreciates their viewers. I definitely appreciate my viewers. I love people who come out to streams and comment on videos and all that active stuff, or just check out the new videos. All of it's awesome, and it's genuinely helpful and supportive. But at the same time, like, I really don't like when creators really harp on that, or like they really dig in and they're like, each one of you is my close personal friend, because that creates a weird sense of obligation, right? And within a parasocial relationship, only one person is actually going to benefit from that so-called friendship, and that's a very one-sided relationship, and those don't tend to be super healthy. So yeah, I think avoiding those parasocial relationships, or just not digging so far into it and really trying to promote that, I think can be a good way to counteract engagement. Next up, serving ads. So YouTube likes serving ads. It likes when your videos are able to serve ads. If you have big numbers, it knows more people are going to see those ads. You'll like it because you're getting more money paid out if more people are seeing the ads, all that kind of stuff. So a really simple way to subvert that is you just don't join the partner program. As far as I know, once you hit the thresholds for being able to apply to the partner program, I think you're automatically applied. I'm not sure about that because I haven't gotten there yet. If you do have the option to join or not join, in this case, don't join. Just don't enable ads for your channel at all. Another way to do it, if you are part of the partner program, is to switch off ads for your videos, which is a thing you can do right now, technically. One of the only channels I know that has done it is Jim Sterling's channel. They just said, no ads, we're not doing ads here. We don't want them ever. If we get get a copyright claim. We're going to get rid of that so that other people can't put ads on our videos. However, there's some difficulties with this point in the list specifically because, for one thing, if YouTube is your full-time job, then ad revenue is going to be a substantial source of income. Even if it's not a huge amount of money, even if you're making more money on Patreon or through other avenues, it's still a decent chunk of change if you have a huge subscriber count and you get big view numbers. To actively avoid running ads on your channel, you would really need sustainable income from all the other sources, and that's not the position that everyone's in. Again, this is all theoretical, but like, this would be a potential issue for just shutting down ads on your channel. Another huge issue that essentially nullifies this whole thing is that, as I covered in a video a long time ago, it feels like a long time ago, YouTube made it very clear in an email they sent out to creators that YouTube now has they have the right to put ads on any video on the platform. Doesn't matter if you're in the partner program, doesn't matter whether you are and you've switched off ads on your channel, they can do it. They just came out and said that, like, we have that power, deal with it. That was kind of the tone. I haven't seen this put into action as far as I know. Obviously, I would have to know each channel runner specifically and ask them, like, oh, did you put ads on this video or not? Is YouTube putting ads here? So it doesn't seem to be happening so far, at least to the extent that I can tell. But I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will start doing this at some point. But since they already announced it such a long time ago, I don't even know if people will remember that it's a thing. And viewers definitely won't know, because how can you? Every time you see a video with a bunch of ads, it almost doesn't matter whether you think that the creator said you can have all these ads in the video or if the site did. You just have to deal with them or do the very expensive membership program. So it's really tricky. So I don't know if at the end of the day there is any way to subvert that specific point. I mean, I guess this seems a little backward, but like, I guess you could potentially encourage people to join with YouTube memberships. It apparently is a way of directly supporting each channel that you watch a lot of. I mean, obviously though, it's directly supporting YouTube by sending them a steady amount of money each month, a pretty significant amount too. But if we want to get technical, YouTube memberships don't specifically support the YouTube algorithm in this category. So maybe that's a loophole here. And I do think that, based on what I've heard from a lot of different sources, I do think that the subscription revenue model for YouTube and basically any other video streaming site is likely to be the future norm. I do think that it's going to be the new revenue model for all these sites. I think ad revenue is just paying out less and less. I think companies are less motivated to purchase ads if they're not effective. They want more for whatever amount they're willing to pay, regardless of whether that more can actually be achieved. So it's a really tricky section, but we just got to move on to the next one, which is the high impressions click-through rate, that whole thing. This one's pretty simple. My ideas are very basic on this one, but make bad thumbnails. Make pretty bad thumbnails. We kind of have an idea of what tend to be effective thumbnails for getting people to click on your video. Just look at any massive YouTube channel, I won't name names, but the really bad ones that just get millions of views on every single video despite the fact that the content itself is trash. The videos have kind of converged on a single homogenized point in terms of style and structure and layout and everything. So that's what the supposedly good ones, quote unquote, are. So just make a bad one. Make a confusing thumbnail. Make one that's not even directly related to the content of the video. If you really want to get crazy, don't even make the title of the video related to the content. Call it something completely different. It'll confuse people. They will maybe even get upset with the site as a whole and hop off YouTube. They certainly won't follow through with the rest of your stuff if they've come to understand that you mislead people all the time. I actually think this would be kind of fun, even if it's sort of mean to real world viewers. Okay, we're moving now. The next one is consistent uploads. So again, yeah, pretty obvious in terms of potential subversion here. Just don't upload videos consistently. And I think that there's a really positive way to spin this too, because rather than trying to follow some kind of convoluted bad upload schedule, you could take a more positive approach, I think, which is just to be healthy about it. Like, only upload a video when you actually want to upload a video. Don't force yourself. Don't feel like you got to do daily stuff or weekly stuff. You can also have different video lengths in this category. You can, because I think it's what, 8 minute? There's an 8 minute or like 10 minute cutoff for series monetization on YouTube, I think. But in general, they like long form content a lot. They like stuff that will keep people on the platform for as long as possible. Okay, next step. They like big numbers. The algorithm likes big numbers. So how do we get rid of that? Well, sadly, doing the rest of the stuff that we've been talking about here will probably result in low numbers regardless of what the content is or the quality. Or, this one's a little interesting too, you could post videos as private or unlisted so that people can't just find them naturally on the site, specifically after they've started gaining traction. So if you have a video that's really taking off and you know that it's heading in the direction where it's supporting the algorithm in that way, it's doing what it's supposed to do, nuke it. Yeah, I mean, you could pull it, but I think it's kind of funnier to just leave it unlisted. Like, people can still find it if they really work for it, or they don't. People don't find your video. Next up, and this is a side one, I think, right? I'm going to insert another thing that the algorithm likes because I forgot to talk about it earlier. Don't worry, it's in the list now. Look, it's in the list. Perfect. The algorithm really seems to like the monopoly, having a monopoly on discoverability on the site, right? It likes being in charge of who sees what videos, because then people have to play the game. People have to do what the algorithm and YouTube as a platform likes in order to succeed. So in terms of how we can subvert this one, we promote channels and videos externally. That could be online, just on other sites outside of YouTube, or it could be real life stuff. It could be real life word of mouth through a text or talking to someone in person. I also think a funny way of doing this is sort of analog marketing of digital content. So like, you could make flyers that tell people to watch a specific video. I think that would be great. I think that would be kind of cool. But that's the last one I had. So that was the last point of specific ways we can not do the things that the YouTube algorithm likes. So we finally made it to sort of the summary section of the discussion. Again, the usefulness of subverting the algorithm at all is questionable, especially for a smaller channel. I think that it would be really awesome to see massive YouTube channels just abandoning YouTube for other platforms or no platforms at all. That would actually probably have a significant impact of some kind. And in a way, this is kind of actually happening right now via Twitch, especially in the gaming space between YouTube and Twitch. You do have certain channels and people who are just saying, no, I don't want to put stuff on YouTube all the time. I enjoy streaming more, or like I make more money streaming and all this other kind of stuff. So maybe that is a kind of natural form of resistance there. But then again, if we go beyond that initial question of the video, purposefully leaving behind a Google property to then go contribute to an Amazon property is kind of meaningless in terms of the big picture. Regardless, it is a way to mount some form of resistance against the way that YouTube operates. And in fact, right now, sharing creations on any social media platform or any streaming site just means that you're putting up with the recommendation algorithms. It's just a reality of the situation, and algorithms on their own, like the idea of the algorithm in these specific applications, it's not evil. It's not inherently bad at all. But I think right now, a lot of these algorithms are so bad, or the effects that they have are so bad, that people are drastically altering their work to then appease algorithms, when actually it should be the complete other way around. Algorithms should be molded and sort of respond to how real people create quality work and how that work gets shared and grows over time. I think for a lot of us who, if you agree with a lot of the stuff that I've been saying, I think it is important for us to speak out in favor of improved algorithms. Like, we can directly say to a lot of these companies, look, whatever design you got going right now, it might be good for you. It's not good for us, real people. I do think that's a really decent way of criticizing and of making your voice heard and all that kind of stuff. I'm not super hopeful about how that could actually effectively change things unless it was massive amounts of people suddenly saying to companies, hey, you really need to change things for the better. So with that in mind, in the meantime, I think that we as creators, we can also just subvert current algorithms by removing profit motive and trend chasing from our creation process. Aside from all the other stuff that I've talked about in this video, all the other specifics of like potential subversion tactics to kind of troll the YouTube algorithm, apart from all that, set all that aside, even if you don't want to do all that, that's fine. But another way you can have a small form of resistance and apply it to your work is that when you're making the thing, don't worry about all that stuff. Like, don't, and I know it's hard, especially if you're like, well gosh, whether you're a brand new artist or someone who is established, that's always going to be somewhere in your mind. I think it's just part of the game, right? Like, if you want to do this professionally, you got to make enough money from it. So of course you're going to be considering on some level, how is this going to perform? How much money can I realistically make from this thing? But My specific request here is to kind of isolate that profit motive part of creating things and being a professional artist. Isolate it, put it over here in this section of the process. I have a really basic breakdown here of the making something and sharing it with other people. So you have kind of the pre-production area where you have your really big picture motivations. It's maybe making money. It's maybe being validated for making certain work. You have just your subconscious collection of different media influences and things that you experience in life that'll probably make their way into your work at some point. And yeah, you have your big high-minded ideals and your massive goals, right? All that kind of stuff. I want to push the medium forward. I want to do something creative and new. That's all kind of in the pre-production phase. And then that middle part, this is the part that I find very important to actually making a specific piece. This is where I don't think the profit motive has any reason, I don't think you can have it in here. I think it's potentially an issue if it's a big part of this section here, which should be focused more on your specific craft, making something of high quality, revising specific choices, making it better, just pure expression of whatever you happen to be feeling or what you want to communicate with the piece, sort of your natural instinct as it applies to your craft. If you can keep, and then of course, the last step is response to the work, sharing with other people, discussion about it, assessment, whether it's assessment from others or personal assessment of your work and wanting to change things about it in the future. If we can keep profit motive and like algorithmic performance out of this middle section, I think it could result in a lot more high quality work. And again, I know it's tough, and if you want to do this stuff professionally, you have to think about it on some level. But if you can manage the process of making the thing in a more pure state, where you're just focusing on that piece itself and whether you're satisfied with it or not, I think that improves the work. It's obviously very subjective, and I'm speaking from personal experience here with different things that I've made, but I tend to most like the stuff where I wasn't completely clogged up creatively with how the thing was going to perform in the end. You just can't do it. It's just not helpful for me. And I think that, again, aside from all the other tactics I talked about in the video, over a very long video, this is another way of subverting. This is another way of making something of quality without bending your work to fit into an algorithm that's not doing any of us any favors at all. And my gosh, I think I'm done. I think I'm done. So that was almost a solid hour of just kind of rambling on a specific topic. Again, it's just super open-ended. I don't know. I hope this has been okay. It's kind of like a lecture for a course that doesn't exist. Yeah, it's just something I wanted to talk about. More than anything, this is about discussion. If you have things to say about this, go for it. This is what it's all about. I'm not trying to say that everything that I've put forth here is correct. Not at all. It's just thoughts that I've had about the topic. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it on some level. I do kind of want to do this, use this similar format for a couple of other topics. We'll see. But then again, it almost doesn't matter how it performs. If it ends up being something that I feel was satisfying to create, I'll probably do more of it. I think that kind of summarizes everything right there, doesn't it? But that's it. I gotta stop talking and cook food or something. But that's all. Thanks for stopping by.